My boss says my chemo treatment isn't as bad as all that. So, I put the evidence in her hands. A few years ago I needed a course of chemotherapy and was warned to expect all the usual side effects: nausea, fatigue, aches and pains, and, of course, hair loss. Well, after the first couple of rounds I was feeling fairly good, not too nauseous, which had, weirdly, been my main worry, as I hate throwing up, vomit free since '93, etc. etc. My gums had begun to hurt though, and I was starting to notice my hair was beginning to get, shall we say, a little bit loose? I'd noticed a bit more on my comb, and a little more in the shower drain than usual. Now I'd usually just put this down to regular old male pattern baldness paranoia, MPDP, but I reckon treatment was beginning to take effect. Well, a couple of rounds further on, I really knew it. I felt pretty old and creaky, I had mouth ulcers, and my appetite had vanished. Actually, that's not quite true. I occasionally craved a BLT sandwich, squashed wafer thin, and chilled to near sub-zero temperature. I asked a doctor if this meant anything, and she said,
"Yes, it now means you want a BLT for lunch."
Helpful. However, my hair was still in place, but I could feel it was losing the battle to cling on. Even so, now I worked in a small office, and my boss, Carla, fake name, was a woman in her 40s who was, shall we say, kind of, self-involved. She would talk incessantly about herself, and the theme was always the same: how hard her life was, and the many insufferable situations she had to deal with. And, being forced to listen to a lot of these problems, we all came to the conclusion that most of these insufferable situations were A, basically just run-of-the-mill problems everyone has to deal with, and B, largely self-inflicted. And when it came to work, no matter what the issue was, or how it needed to be fixed, it always came back to her and how the situation made her feel. Any given meeting was at least 40% discussing how this issue affected her personally and deleteriously, when all we wanted to do was just get the job done. It got pretty annoying from time to time, but apart from the occasional inward sigh at her behavior, I powered through, until I told her about my upcoming chemo. At first she seemed cool with everything. I'd take 3 days off every couple of weeks to stay on a ward for the treatment, and I'd be back in the office the remaining time. No problem, good stuff. I told a couple of other people in the office too, but I didn't talk about it much. I didn't really want to get labeled as the cancer guy, and as the subject's a bit of a downer, I didn't want to bum people out needlessly. Everybody's got something going on in their lives, right? But then Carla's attitude began to change. I began to notice odd pass-ag comments she would make mentioning my treatment, or my having to visit the doctor. Not much at first, but they began to grow in frequency. And then after a few days my boss's friend came over to have a quiet conversation with me.
"She's just finding it very hard to come to terms with your news,"
she said.
"It's really affecting her deeply. Just give her some time."
I was pretty nonplussed at this, but asked the friend whether my situation was all bringing up some stuff from the past, or maybe a family member was ill too, but she just replied,
No, nothing like that. She's just a really sensitive person."
I told the friend that, well, my boss didn't really need to come to terms with anything, cause it was me having the treatment and not her, and that she shouldn't worry about it. And then I went off for a long therapeutic crap to calm down. Over the next week my boss's behavior got more passive-aggressive towards me, and slowly a thought began to percolate through my mind. Surely she's not jealous, right? Surely she can't think I'm pulling focus in some way from her? And now she's upset because she's not able to trump chemotherapy? Because that would be insanely shallow, right? Right? But the more her behavior went on, and the more I thought about it, well, once you eliminate the impossible, as Sherlock Holmes said, right? So things finally came to a head of hair. About 2 weeks later, I was at my desk but feeling fairly rough by this point. I'd finished a round of chemo 2 days earlier, and my skin was looking pretty gray. My teeth felt wobbly, but my hair was still there, but it felt like it was just kinda resting on the top of my head, rather than anchored there. A colleague noticed I looked under the weather and kindly asked me if I was okay, and I replied, "I'll be alright. Thanks, but I reckon I won't have much hair this time next week." Well, my boss happened to pass by at that moment, and I could see her face screw up as I said it. She then chipped in,
"Oh, come on, I don't think the chemotherapy is as bad as all that, is it?"
Now, had this come from a friend I probably would have let it go, and with my close friends I'd made some pretty similar and extremely dark jokes myself, and so had they, but that's what you do with close friends, right? But I was not close with my boss. But something just collapsed soggily in the center of me when she said it, and before I knew what I was doing, I'd stood up and gone over to her, blocking her exit before she could leave the room. "I'm not sure, Carla," I said, "I'm not sure if chemotherapy is as bad as all that. Why don't we find out?" And as I said it, I reached up to the back of my head, and casually yanked out a giant fistful of hair. Now my hair at the time was fairly short, but pretty curly, so I had a good old amount in my hand, about the size of an enormous orange. The back of my head suddenly had a huge bald patch, of the type you usually only see in a home haircut catastrophe sort of way when the clipper guard falls off. Put your hand across the back of your head now, imagine all of that suddenly gone. And you're in the right ballpark. I held the mass of hair up in the air for a second, and then looked my boss again. What do you think, Carla? I said calmly as I plonked it down in her quivering hand. Let me know. And I turned and left the now supernaturally quiet office. Carla just looked at the tribble in her hand as if it was a grenade. Now not even a long therapeutic poop was going to sort this one out. So I took an early lunch and stomped out to find a place that could make me a freezing cold squashed BLT sandwich with extra mayo. When I got back to the office, the HR rep was waiting near my desk. Uh-oh, I smiled, sat down, and she came over. There was a pregnant pause. She took a breath.
A couple of your colleagues let me know what happened with Carla earlier.
She began. I see, I replied cagily. Because, as we all know, HR is not your friend. They may say they're your friend, and that they're there to protect your rights, but really they're just there to ensure the company can treat everybody poopily in a non-actionable way. Okay, rant over. Back to the story. Bear in mind what just happened, the HR lady continued.
We'd like to offer you paid leave for the remainder of your treatment. Would that be okay with you?
Now, bearing in mind I had at least 3 more cycles of treatment, lasting 6 more weeks, my answer was a carefully considered yes. Yes, I believe that would be all right with me, Ms. HR lady. Me and my bald patch walked out of the office 10 minutes later and went home. My girlfriend and I called our friends over that evening for some booze and curry, and we all got boozed and shaved my head. Though I looked weird, I was pleasantly surprised to find my head didn't have too many weird bumps on it. Even my occipital bun was pretty small. Google it, just for fun. It was a good evening, especially when I decided it would be hilarious to tell my male friends how grateful I was that they had all agreed to shave their heads too in solidarity. I handed the clippers to my friend Mike, who had dark, shoulder-length hair. And didn't that magnificent clown pause for only 2 seconds before trying to plug the clippers in? I managed to wrestle them off him, laughing my ash off. My girlfriend then told me no more booze for op. Boo. Anyway, to cut to the chase, the rest of the treatment went well, everything went into remission, and has thankfully stayed in remission ever since, so job done. Well done, medical team. I took the time off, got through the treatment, and also managed to find myself a new job at the same time before I had to return. Meanwhile, back at the office, Carla's star was on the wane. Word had gotten around about her behavior. She tried her usual tricks, how she'd been misunderstood, and how upset she was about the whole thing. But people were noticeably colder towards her, according to my colleagues, and people had started to refer to her as Hairball behind her back. The name stuck. I finally returned to work, only to hand my notice in and leave. On my way out, I tried to be as classy as possible with Carla. I thanked her for the opportunity, and wished her well for the future. She didn't say much. I gave her a card and a small token of my appreciation. I told her to not bother unwrapping it till she got home. It was a DVD of a popular 1979 anti-war musical directed by Milos Forman starring John Savage and Treat Williams. You've still got Google open from when you looked up occipital bun, right? Well, look this one up too. My hair grew back. I returned to my ordinary regular run-of-the-mill male pattern baldness paranoia. The new job was pretty terrific. And even now, I still like ice cold, wafer thin BLTs.